Chapter 10, World War I and beyond, there's kind of two big essential questions to be paying attention to throughout this chapter. One is what caused the U.S. to become involved in World War I, because we're going to see that we're going to kind of remain neutral, but what kind of eventually drags us into the conflict. And kind of a bigger question is how did the U.S. change as a result of its involvement in World War I? So the first section here is from neutrality to war, and we're going to look at the big causes of World War I, and then kind of the baby steps the U.S. takes towards entering the war. So the things that you should be able to do by the end of this section and by the end of the chapter is identify causes, both direct and indirect, of World War I, the course and the nature of the war, and then why the U.S. abandoned that neutrality and then entered on the side of the Allies. So when we look at the causes, this acronym MAIN is a good way to keep track of what things were the indirect causes, because these things have been building up really for over a century. So if we go back to 1815, the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the concert of Europe is going to create this system that's going to prevent Europe from breaking into war. And for a century, it works. But the problem is there's all of these other causes that are under the surface that are going to just build up and increase tension. So one is throughout Europe, you see this growing militarism, this glorification of the military. And what you have is you have a generation of Europeans who hadn't known war, nor the horrors of war, and so they have this romantic vision of what war is all about. The other thing that starts to happen because of colonialism and this growing militarism is Europe divides itself up into a series of alliances. And these alliances changed and grew and kind of evolved over time. But essentially when we get to World War I, we've got the Triple Alliance, which is Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And we've got the Triple Entente, which is Great Britain, France, and Russia. And one of the real problems with these alliances is it's not really out in the open. I mean, people kind of know roughly who's aligned with who, but they're really not sure what are the ramifications of us attacking one country. They really don't know how that's all going to play out and the dominoes that are going to topple when that happens. Imperialism. The fact that you have this race for gobbling up colonies, and that's going to cause these countries to have more tension. It's also going to cause countries to have more and more conflicts because they've got these colonies all over the world, and something that happens over in Asia can have this ripple effect that's going to impact things that happen in Africa and Europe. And the other thing is nationalism. This nationalism had been building up again over a series of centuries because these European countries, some of them, for example, Germany, is a very young new country, and they want to prove that they're equal to the rest of Europe. Now, the other thing you have is some parts of Europe, especially in the Ottoman and Austria-Hungarian empires, you have these little groups who are calling for their own independence, and that is just going to grow. And those tensions are just going to increase. So if you think of the main causes, these are the things that are just piled up, like kindling or like gunpowder is another way that it's kind of viewed. And now all you need is some spark to make this whole thing go up. And when the Archduke is assassinated, that's when it happens. Now when you look at this extra credits, World War I, they really do a nice job of kind of going through the days and months leading up to, and they talk about both the indirect causes, the main causes that we had been talking about, but also the thing that causes this whole thing to blow up, which is the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. And they do a really nice job of explaining all of these things in these four sections. So when we look at the fighting beginning, You have the Archduke that gets assassinated. And then here are kind of the step-by-step things that are going to occur over the course of really several weeks that are going to lead to the actual fighting beginning. Now, when we look at the nature of the war, this war is going to be a war of trenches, and there's going to be a couple of different reasons as to why this stalemate is going to emerge. But essentially, when you look at those front lines, both on the Western Front and on the Eastern Front, you're not going to see a whole lot of movement back and forth. You're going to see people fighting day after day, month after month, year after year over the same ground because of these trenches. And so when you look at another reason, or kind of a big reason why this happens, is World War I is a modern war. When you look at all of those items that are on that image, these are all brand new tools of war. And it's going to make this a brutal war. And then you throw in there that people are going to continue to fight as if it's two armies lined up against each other in a battlefield, and you just march across the battlefield and you engage the enemy. That isn't going to work against these new weapons. And that's going to lead to a tremendous death toll. When you look at the reality of the trench warfare, it's a miserable experience. You're living, eating, sleeping, going to the bathroom in the same place. And so it's very unsanitary. People get sick. It's going to be a very brutal war when you look at the number of deaths. And this is going to be kind of the war that most people hope will end all wars because of the brutality of it. Rats are a constant problem. Lice is a constant problem. And then you also have this trench foot, this rotting of your feet that take place because you're standing in mud and water, and it just basically eats away the flesh of your feet. And so people, when they get done with this war, are really going to be sick of it. When we look at the United States involvement, President Wilson really wants to stay out of it, and he preaches impartiality in thought as well as in action. So we shouldn't pick a side, both internally, and we definitely shouldn't pick a side externally. We shouldn't have favorites. That's what he said, but the problem is that just isn't the way things are going to go out, or the way things are going to work, because Americans are going to kind of have loyalties based on where they originally came from. And when you look at the fact that a third of all Americans are foreign born, they tend to be rooting for the country that they came from. When you look at most Americans, they tend to support Great Britain and France. And so we are not going to be impartial. We're going to kind of lean towards helping Great Britain and France more so than Germany, and that's going to kind of move us in the direction of becoming involved in this war. So what you're going to see over time is American opinion is going to crystallize or harden, and you're going to get three very different groups. The one are isolationists, and you can see that in this cartoon. Keep out of Europe. No matter what, make sure that we don't get involved in Europe's business and affairs because it's bad for the United States. The second group are the interventionists, who believe that we have to help our allies, we have to be involved in the war, and we need to hurry up and get our military ready and get over there and get involved in the fighting. The third group are the interventionists, and this is a little bit tougher group to kind of pin down because they're somewhere in between. They don't necessarily think that we should go to fight in the war, but they do believe we have to be involved in foreign affairs so that we can influence our business interests. That if we totally retreat from the world, then we're going to be at the mercy of everybody else. And what we want to do is we want to maintain peace so that we can have the free flow of trade and we can continue to sell American goods all over the world. What's going to eventually happen, though, is as these atrocities get sent home, and the news is going to kind of play a role in this again, in that they're going to kind of emphasize how terrible the Germans are, in particular the Germans. And so they're going to send this message that the Germans are committing all of these atrocities and the horrors of war, and that we need to make sure that we kind of go and intervene and help our allies and our friends. So now those are kind of the indirect things. There's going to be a couple of steps that are going to increase our involvement. One is Great Britain is going to place a blockade on Germany so that they can't get goods from the United States and other places. And the problem with this is that Britain is going to ban both contraband and non-contraband goods. So contraband goods, you can ban things like weapons and ammunition. You can keep countries from getting access to those things, but you can't keep countries from getting access to medical supplies or food or things like that. Those are non-contraband items. Those things need to be able to flow across borders and across the oceans. In response, German submarines are going to begin to attack ships to be able to make sure that trade is able to get into Germany. The problem with this is that sooner or later, Germany has kind of figured out that the United States has picked a side, and they're going to start to sink ships, passenger ships, and any kind of ships, because they're going to try and win the war. And a couple of those that get sunk are the Lusitania and the Sussex, and you're going to have Americans who are aboard those, and they're going to get killed, and that's going to start moving American opinion against Germany and also towards getting involved in the war. And so sooner or later, people are going to say, we need to begin to protect our people, we have to get involved, and the Germans are being the aggressors here. Wilson, little bit by bit, is going to move America towards war. So the National Defense Act, it's going to begin to build up our military, especially increasing the number of people who are serving in the military. He's also going to pass or sign into law the Naval Construction Act, where we're going to start to grow our Navy, so that way we can be prepared for this war that is going. Wilson also believes we need to be involved in the war so we can be involved in the peace settlement afterwards. And when you really look at American opinion, this unrestricted German warfare is going to move American opinion against the Germans. There's going to be the Zimmerman note that gets intercepted, where the Germans are offering to return parts of the United States, for example, Texas and California and Arizona and New Mexico, that Mexico had lost to the United States in the Mexican-American War in exchange for attacking the United States. So if Mexico attacks the United States, keeps us busy, Germany will then try and help return those lost areas to Mexico after the war. Mexico doesn't take them up on this, but this note gets intercepted, it gets published, and it's going to kind of harden American opinion against the Germans.